Welcome to IMS Learning Impact on Demand 2020, Solutions for Highly Effective Digital Teaching and Learning in Response to the Accelerated Move to Remote Education. At IMS, we believe in the power of dynamic collaboration as a catalyst for digital innovation and transformation in education. And in that spirit, we are bringing together leaders in our community, representing top learning institutions and educational technology suppliers, to share knowledge and ideas for reimagining the educational experience and exploring new opportunities for shaping the future of teaching and learning. Today's topic is, I think, a particularly relevant one and a very prominent one in the current environment, and that is accessibility in digital learning. And here to discuss it with me are Justin Tumelaire, Accessibility Manager at Cengage.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Emily Anderson, Manager of UX Strategy and Research, National Geographic Learning.
Hello.
And Geoff, Director of Perkins Access Consulting.
Hey, everybody.
All right, thank you all for joining me today. You know, like I said, accessibility is, well, it's always a challenge. It's been an increasing challenge in the move to sort of online and digital resources. And now in the current climate, it's even more prominent as the emphasis on those methods of delivery are very much in the in the forefront of everyone's thoughts. Let's start with what I hope is a fairly easy question, although those are rarely easy questions, and that is, what do we mean when we talk about accessibility, especially in the context of digital learning, because it does mean some different things than in the physical world.
Right. Yeah. Well, this question has all kinds of answers, and it depends on the context, I think. But broadly speaking, when we're talking about accessibility, we're certainly talking about making things usable by students with disabilities of all kinds. It's easy to focus on students who are blind or visually impaired, but accessibility covers all kinds of aspects, including many visual aspects. But accessibility is part of usability. And so when we talk about accessibility, we're not just talking about making things usable by, again, students with disabilities, but by all students, because the big idea is that you want to design one resource that everybody can use. And when you design something to be accessible, you design it to be more usable by everybody. So that's the sort of big picture approach, I think.
And I'll add to that too, specifically, Cary, you mentioned the context of learning. And from our perspective, it is also what Geoff said, but also making sure that what we develop delivers meaningful learning experience with successful results as well.
Yeah, I'll even add further to that, right, is in accessibility. I think a lot of people know there's different standards. There's the WCAG 2.1 AA standards, and that's really lovely. And there's other standards. And from my perspective, Justin's perspective, when we make digital products and digital experiences for teachers and students, I'm in K-12. I'm in the school, on the school side. Justin's in the higher ed side of Cengage. We can certainly comply to standards. The color contrast needs to be 4.5 to 1. You know, all these different things. We can definitely, and we do definitely comply to that. But it is it's more of a conversation and a wider range, like Geoff was saying, when you think about it being usable. If I think about the youngest students that we make products for, K-2 students, accessible means more than just what might be written in the list. So it gets wider and wider the more and more you look at it.
Yeah, it's, I often think of it when I talk about accessibility is it's not just about conforming. You know, you can conform to color and contrast, like you said, but are those colors meaningful in a certain way, for example? But also, if you're just talking about conformance, you can hit all of the criteria, maybe in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but that doesn't guarantee usability, and it doesn't always guarantee accuracy either. Yeah. So it's not just checkbox.
An example of that I like to use with the folks I work with is the idea of if you have a circle indicator on the screen, right? And a green circle means good, you got it. Red circle means no. Well, if you have certain kinds of color blindness, those look exactly the same. So when we design things, we always do color disability testing, but we also try to use two indications, right? So it's a green check mark, it's a red X. So all of those little things help with the information, getting the correct information across, and that definitely expands into usability alongside of things being fully accessible.
Yeah, and you know, we're sort of talking about, you were sort of talking about universal design at this point, and color and contrast is one really good example because, you know, as people on this call, at least, who are sighted, these are sort of easy things to detect. But another really good example of materials that are designed to be universally usable are videos with captions. You know, captions were originally targeted at TV watchers who were deaf or hard of hearing, but it became obvious fairly quickly that captions can be used for any number of purposes by anybody, to teach people how to read, to better comprehension, for reading, for learning vocabulary. These days, as you know, you can't look anywhere in a public space without seeing captions on a TV, just about anywhere. And that's thanks to a lot of legislation, but captions in the classroom are not quite, well, they are required, certainly. But I think more and more hearing students have found great uses for captioning, helping them focus, for one thing, on what's happening.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And you know, kind of that idea that when we talk about accessibility, it's you know, sometimes we come at it with a very narrow sense of what we think we're talking about. And in fact, it is a much broader and much more comprehensive topic that, as you said, Geoff, gets us into areas of universal design. And Emily, as you said, is very, you know, is very specific, or at least you have to be careful about how you think about it for different, not only different audiences in terms of perhaps different disabilities, but different age groups, different experiences and backgrounds and things like that. So Justin and Emily, you're both with Cengage. Tell us a little bit about the sort of the history and the elements of accessibility in the broader Cengage world. I know that's a very broad, you know, a broad set of solutions out there, and that encompasses a lot of stuff. But tell us a little bit about sort of the things that are out there as in kind of your role as you think about accessible needs when it comes to the production of these digital materials.
Justin, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, it really is a big question that we could probably talk a lot about. But to kind of take a step back and maybe start within 1 to 2 years ago, there was a big initiative on our end where it was about give or take $1 million was spent to go to the copyright 2018 and 19 products and add alt text to images and add captions and transcripts to videos, and make sure the PowerPoints that we create are accessible. And really that was a big launching off point for us. But we also know that it doesn't stop there, right? There's so much to accessibility, and it really can be, well, it can be intimidating too, right? To be able to take this on at scale. So what we've done since is we've created accessibility guidelines that help guide the design and development of our products, because we have many products across many platforms. And then in addition to that is creating lessons, micro lessons we've created that help support those guidelines. So how can we establish a culture of learning to help demystify the requirements of accessibility, because they can be so overwhelming. So not only have we taken steps to create guidelines and kind of set a North Star for what we need to follow, but supporting that foundationally with how can we go about doing this and how can we better understand this. And then taking it a step further to really driving initiatives internally to make sure that we're always enhancing the experience, enhancing the accessibility of the products that we develop and the support that we provide.
Yeah, I'll add to that on the K-12 side, we often, within Cengage, we use a lot of the exact same technology as the higher ed group, which is awesome for many reasons. It's efficient, it keeps costs down, all those kind of things. But there's often different needs that a K2, a K-12 student or teacher needs that's different than higher ed. So in that same way, if higher ed does something that helps with accessibility, these different components that then we use in our products, if they are accessible, then by definition, we benefit from that, and vice versa. In anything that we make, K-12 school makes by itself, just like higher ed would do, I make sure, and our team makes sure that we are designing it always to be fully accessible, and that is, touch targets are appropriate. Appropriate sizes, color contrast, alt text, all the things that are very specified. And then we make sure that the development of it is fully accessible. And then we have basically hackathons maybe once a year where we just try to find all the accessibility bugs on our platform and then just take care of them. And so it's kind of an upfront lessons learned. Okay, we know from this product that this didn't work and we got feedback from such and such, and applying that, constantly learning and building up our own knowledge and muscle in it. And then also once something is launched, it not being done and always wanting to improve on it. So it's just a cyclical thing of upfront work and then testing it.
Yeah, Justin, Emily, I find it interesting. You both work for the same company and you're in different sectors, K-12 and higher ed, and you're both doing the same things, so that the materials that come out of K-12, students who have used those will likely find a lot of similarities in terms of accessibility and design as they move into higher ed. This is a really important point, I think, because it shows that everyone in the organization is essentially holding hands when it comes to accessibility, so that you're developing a very strong pattern of design, and it's part of the development culture there now.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and what's nice is, well, Emily and I are on multiple working groups specifically related to accessibility as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's really proven valuable too, because of that hand-holding, right, Geoff? And it gives us the chance to leverage each other's knowledge and resources and making sure that we are marching towards the same vision for accessibility and not trying to reinvent the wheel when a successful resource already exists.
Yeah, this is something that I think we all have seen many times, is that Justin is working over there and Emily is working over there, and they don't talk to each other, and they both developed great accessibility solutions that have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah. And the bigger the institution, the more risk of that occurring, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Cengage does a good job of having these different working groups and what's called center of excellence. So different center of excellences around different topics, and accessibility certainly being one, but many others, learning, design kind of things. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And Geoff, you work with Emily and with Justin and with Cengage, but mm-hmm. tell me a little bit about Perkins, because your background or the role of Perkins is specifically around accessibility. Is that?
Yes, I'm part of Perkins Access, which is a consulting arm of the Perkins School for the Blind, which is the oldest school for the blind in the US. We are now 191 years old. I am not that old, but thank you. But at Perkins Access, our broad goal is to make, obviously, as much online material as accessible as possible. But we have a specialty working with academic institutions, people who develop learning management systems and learning platforms. We work specifically with higher ed institutions as well, to help make sure that academic materials in all of their many forms are accessible and usable by everybody. And that kind of work ranges from working with new universities, large universities, small universities, who maybe are trying to bring up to date existing materials. But really what we also do is work with institutions at the beginning of the design process to make sure that not only are they thinking about accessibility from the very first day they start talking about design, but they're thinking about a process called inclusive design, which means that you design with members of the target audience as part of the process. So you do user testing with users with disabilities, but even before that, you include users with disabilities in the design process. So you can find out what people with certain types of abilities really need in order to read a textbook, to take a test, to understand a scientific experiment online. And when you design with people with disabilities as part of the process, when it comes time to testing and then later implementation, you've really done all the work that you can do to make sure that you're not just working with experts who know a lot about conformance and know a lot about coding and design, but you're working with the audience to give them exactly what they want.
And so then how do you work with, for example, Emily and Justin and their teams?
Well, what we've done, we've done a number of things with Cengage. We've worked with some of their learning platforms like MindTap and CNow to make sure that the materials going into that are accessible. We also work with them to make sure that sort of the wrapper around those materials, the way that you get to the accessible textbook is accessible, because it's no good if the textbook is accessible but you can't even get to it. So we make sure that that everything is as accessible as possible, but we also advise Cengage on design, the inclusive design process, design reviews, training for development staff as well, to make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And like we said earlier with Emily and Justin, that everyone is holding hands. Everyone is sort of marching toward the same goal in the same way, not to stifle creativity, but just to make sure that everybody has the approach in mind that can be used across the institution.
So if I could add to that too, one of the real values, one of the many values of working together, especially with some of our key platforms, is it's not just the evaluation and the feedback of, hey, this is where it falls short, this is what you need to do differently, which is incredibly helpful. But also after our development teams implement those changes, the Perkins team going back in to validate that the changes were made correctly and basically signing off on them for us. And that's an added element of this that really not only adds confidence, but ensures that we're putting the best product forward that we can.
Yeah, yeah. So with all of that in mind and kind of thinking about that as a foundation, as institutions and districts think about accessibility and accessibility needs that they have, where do they even start? What are some of the initial things that they should be thinking about, or the initial questions they should be asking, either of themselves or of their suppliers?
I can start with that.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
We get, as many of you probably know, K-12 runs on adoptions, right? The entire state of California is looking for new social studies. The entire state of Florida is looking for reading, that kind of thing. When we get those, we get all the standards that we need to abide by, great. And we also get requirements. And in those requirements, it will often say, is it accessible? No.
Yes, no.
The answer is,
Yeah.
it's hard to answer those kind of questions. For example, the website Amazon isn't fully accessible. So, in order for me to provide a good answer, or for us, my team to provide a good answer, we really need to know the use cases. Is it accessible to, do you have a large population who are colorblind? Gotcha. Do you have a large, populations that need a refreshable browser display, a braille reader? Gotcha. Is there a lot of kids who have attention deficit disorder, and therefore having things in smaller chunked content is really crucial? I can answer that. So knowing what the use case is, and when you're talking about accessibility, like help me help you in asking a question, hey, can you show me, I need to be able to, my elementary school students, we just have a lot of students who are needing to navigate by the keyboard only, right? Great, like we got you on that. The other thing that's really helpful to know is, hey, are you looking to use our content within the platform that is provided by Cengage? MindTap School, CNow, OWL, we have a bunch. Or are you looking to do a common cartridge or a thin common cartridge, and you put that in Schoology or Moodle or Canvas, or are you wanting to share it in Google Classroom? That helps me answer the question, because it might be that our content, you're actually asking if the platform, the LMS that you're going to be using is accessible, and we don't have control over Schoology, that kind of thing. So knowing the actual context helps me answer well. And we, like everybody at Cengage, we got you. Like, we desperately want to help make sure that everything is accessible, usable, intuitive, all of those really good things, so that the students, whether school students or higher ed students, are learning the content and not trying to learn the system. We desperately want to help you, but we need to know more information.
Yeah. That's a very good point, Emily, what you just said about technology and using it, that you want to make sure that things are designed so that students can actually learn, not to test them on their ability to use assistive technology, especially when it comes to younger kids who have limited experience with things like screen readers or maybe even keyboard use. You want to make sure that they're able to learn what they need to know and not struggle with the AT.
Yeah, let me give it another example of, like, really the younger you go, if we're talking about the littles who are 5, accessibility is an extra tricky thing for us and for all of you, right? Where we generally say kindergarten through 2nd grade, they are learning to read, not reading to learn, right? So we recently redid our platform to have a completely new UI, user interface, for kindergarten through 2nd grade students. When we did that, accessibility is major and a top goal of the whole project, because in addition to larger touch targets, we call them like fat finger tappers, like the whole thing needs to, like everything around the button needs to be clickable, because they're not super accurate.
Right.
Trackpad navigation is really tricky. As you go down, their dexterity isn't as high as high schoolers, for example. But also the words on the screen need to be accessible, as in they need to know what they mean. We can't use the word dashboard. We can't use, I'm trying to think of another word, but every word that we have on the screen, including in the alt text, we checked to make sure that it's a word that students have learned and are familiar with. And if they weren't familiar with it, could they accurately guess it? So that's doing a lot of user testing, like, you don't know what the word assessment is, but could you guess what the word assessment is? And so that's part of accessibility that isn't in a WCAG standard. Do the student, explicitly, do kindergarten students know what the word study means? But that is part of it, edges into universal design that way.
Justin, what are some of the similar challenges or dissimilar challenges that exist in the higher education realm in that?
Yeah, and actually, I'll kind of take this from a little bit of a different angle, in terms of, if I'm an institution or I've been tasked with implementing an accessibility program or processes at my institution, where do you start, right? It's this huge, intimidating, what do I do? How do I start? What do I do next? And we've gone through some of these exercises as well. But what I'll say, and I think this has benefited not only higher ed, but K-12 and Emily's group as well, is start by identifying the stakeholders, like who's involved, who has a responsibility for ensuring that what we are creating is accessible, and now who are the leaders of those groups. And what we've done within Cengage is we've created an accessibility executive committee. And that executive committee consists of VPs and directors and various leaders of a number of different functional groups, whether it's content creation or technology, whatever the case might be. It's a good sized group, but they represent their functional groups, and they can then roll down initiatives and hold their groups accountable in a way that we cannot, right? So it's not only identifying, okay, who's involved, who are those leaders, let's get their buy-in and make sure that they're driving this messaging down. And then from there, it's where do we need more knowledge? Again, accessibility can be very intimidating, especially if you're new to it. I'm thinking maybe of a faculty member, right, who's now being told, make your courses accessible, but they don't really understand the full scope of accessibility. Well, geez, how do I do that? I'm just going to shut down because I don't know where to start. Right? Which is common and totally understandable. So,
not uncommon,
So now, what knowledge don't we have that we need? Let's do a gap analysis, right? Let's determine where we need to be, where we are now, and what can we then do to improve that knowledge and make people more comfortable. And whether it's developing trainings, finding resources, or even better, like find resources that already exist. Going back to that comment earlier about don't reinvent the wheel. There's some great resources that are available online. Leverage those, help make people more comfortable, hold their hand, and that's going to go a long way, because if you don't take those initial steps, people are going to shut down and you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I want to add to that when people are first faced with make it accessible and they don't know what it means, they don't have the resources to find out. When I speak with people who are just learning about it, I try to emphasize that, yes, there are specifications and guidelines to which you must conform, but you need to back up, first of all, to shed the panic that Justin was just talking about, and talk about this sort of easy to understand things. Don't start telling people about screen reader accessibility, because most people have not used a screen reader if they're not familiar with someone who has. But since we're talking mostly about designers and developers who are sighted and who are hearing, you find something that they will understand immediately. And like Emily has said, color and contrast. That's a big, easy win right there. Captions, those are another one. Just asking somebody to use a keyboard, give them a basic lesson and tell them to use a keyboard to navigate something. Those three things drive home the point of accessibility, I think, very clearly. And then you can also start talking to people about it's okay to fix the easy things first. And easy will be relative to the materials and also relative to the development culture and things like timelines and deadlines. But if you give people the okay to do the easy stuff, I often find that shoulders relax, people stop panting and breathing into bags, and it allows people to sort of step back and understand that accessibility is complicated and it doesn't all have to be done at once. It can be done in pieces and you can do the easy stuff.
I think it's a really good point, because I think, as all of you have pointed out, and I come from a development background in my past, and it can be very easy to go into paralysis when you're looking at a requirement or a project that can simply be overwhelming, and is going to accomplish it in its entirety, is going to take a very, very long period of time and a lot of resources. And so, as you said, it can be very easy, especially for folks who are being asked to do something new, to just shut down and just maybe not even try to do it. And that is obviously counterproductive to the goals. With that in mind, obviously we're in an interesting state these days in the world in terms of, well, in a lot of terms, but certainly in terms of changes in education delivery. A lot of institutions and districts certainly had to go fully online with very short notice. Here this past spring, a lot of institutions are still looking at either fully or at least hybrid online delivery going into the fall and into the entire 2020-2021 school year. In the midst of all that, have you all seen any sort of new things emerge, new desires, new requirements, heightened requirements? How has this change really affected you all and as the folks that are the recipients of these needs?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Where do you start?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So many
You
things.
start.
Okay. Thanks, Geoff. We see a lot of things. We're doing a lot of analysis on we watch different school districts and what decisions they are making about new schedules. So we see things where it is group A comes into school Monday and Wednesday, group B comes in Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday is work at home. We see students who are more self-driven are always at home, and the ones who might need more literal eyeballs on them all the time need to come to the class. We see a bunch of different scenarios, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with. And so in that, we think, okay, what's the actual use case? It's coming back to that same topic. If half of the students are at home, half of the students are in the class, or they're not always in the class, access is the name of the game. So we've found in the younger the grade in school, the higher the use case of teacher, the teacher needing to access the materials. We've seen an increase in requests to just have everything in a PDF. We've seen kindergarten teachers who are like, you know what, how am I going to teach phonics to kindergartners online when all of them need to say out loud, Not going to happen on Zoom. So what I really need is I'm going to be driving to my 25 students' houses every week and dropping off a packet. I just need to print the thing out, you know? And so what is accessible in that really even more is dependent on where are you? Where are the students? How often? How much time do they have? Are they logging in through Clever? Are they logging into an LMS, the piecemeal? So another example is in the main platform for at Cengage for school K-12 products is called MindTap School. So MindTap School MTS has a feature that's called course customization that we finished not too long ago. We're improving that where teachers can literally hide everything except the one thing the students need to do that day. They can rename it. They can change the order. They can add their own links and whatever to it. That makes like literally just click this one thing, focus, focus, focus. Yeah. So all those use cases are uber important, and we're seeing an increased focus on kind of split weeks. Yeah.
Interesting. Justin, how about in higher education? What sorts of things are you saying?
Yeah, so my team handles two different things. One is the internal, drive for initiatives to improve the accessibility of what we develop. The other is support. So our team also works directly with disability support services offices at institutions when there's a student or instructor, for that matter, that experiences some sort of barrier, and we partner with that disability support services office to provide alternatives or whatever the case might be to support that learner or instructor. And we, as is expected, every year before a semester we see what we call the rush, where an increase in the amount of requests that come in. And so far this summer it seems like that rush in preparation for fall is starting earlier because institutions are just getting their ducks in a row sooner, or they have a higher volume, whatever the case might be. So we're certainly seeing that. What I'm anticipating, and this could prove to be either true or false, is also that we've also noticed that midterms tends to be a spike in requests, and that seems to be because students who didn't realize who qualify for support at their institution but didn't request it are realizing, hey, maybe I do need this support. So we generally get a spike in requests at that time as well. And I wouldn't be surprised to see with more learning online being a greater spike as students realize that maybe this support would be helpful to their learning experience.
Yeah, I've actually been hearing that from our institutional members who have said they are the accessibility offices at the institutions are seeing those rises in requests for services and support, precisely as you said, because now there is this greater emphasis on digital delivery of this learning, and they're realizing, oh, I have to make this transition. I have to kind of figure out what I'm going to need to stay up to speed here. So this has been really, really good, and we're actually, already running out of time, much too soon. We could talk for a long time, but I wanted to just kind of wrap up with kind of a broad question for each of you. We can kind of go down the line. Geoff, maybe start with you, and that is really, if you had one kind of message or thing that you would like to say to schools and to institutions about digital accessibility, broadly, current context, whatever the case may be, what would you like to tell them? What would you like them to know? So, Geoff?
Okay, let me choose my word very carefully. I think one thing to make immediately, especially to institutions that are just now learning about or grappling with accessibility, is take a deep breath. Don't panic, and realize that you can't do everything at once, that you cannot address all 50 AA criteria in 1 week, nor should you, and that it's also accessibility, as we've, I think, driven home today, is not just about conforming to guideline 111 or any other guideline. It's about usability, and as well as making things usable by students with disabilities. But to keep in mind that don't just think about the audience of kids with disabilities, think about everybody in the classroom, because everything you do for students with disabilities will absolutely benefit everyone in the classroom. So I like to remind people that it's a big view. Don't panic. That's my message.
It seems to be a bit of a theme today.
Yeah.
Emily, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to build off of Geoff maybe. In K-12, I've maybe never talked to a teacher who isn't incredibly aware of what their students need. They are hyper-focused, and rightly so, on, okay, this is my classroom. This student is really struggling with X, Y, and Z. This student is really struggling with X, Y, and Z. The teacher always very selflessly changes their instruction to then accommodate the students, always. Accessibility doesn't have to be that far off from that, where, okay, I have students in my class who are colorblind. That's pretty simple. Or they have an attention disorder or an orthopedic, mobility issue, something. In that exact same way, use your teacher brain, use your, administrator brain. You're always adapting your instruction for your students and their needs. Same thing here. And I'm speaking selfishly now, at a publisher, we're always desperately wanting to help students learn. And so if there are times where you come across a product from us or anyone that is not helping your students learn, tell us about it. Tell us the use case, tell us the situation, and we really, really want to help. We never want to get in the way of learning ever. And so in that way, use your same teacher brain, the same way that you always think, and apply that to accessibility, and you got it.
Excellent. Justin?
Well, it's hard to come up with anything else because those are such great points that Emily and Geoff made. But I will say, just to add on to what they both said, is accessibility is about the person. It's not about the criteria. It's about the person. It's about the individual and that individual person's experience. You can do everything perfectly, but someone will still experience a barrier. And it's about supporting that individual and that person and being person-centered. But in addition to that, and I've alluded to this a couple times, setting the foundation, right? If you want to progress, if you want to be successful, you need to set up that foundation of support within your institution. You need to set up that knowledge base, and you need to make people comfortable with what they're doing. And regardless of how many criteria there are for accessibility, with each of the stakeholders that have a responsibility for accessibility, like faculty members, focus on what is within their control. Because if you start throwing all the WCAG criteria at them, most of which they cannot control, again, you're just going to be creating a shutdown scenario that you want to avoid.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. Thank you all. I think this has been really tremendously interesting. I have a particular interest in this area, so selfishly,
Excellent.
I've been really glad to be able to participate and to learn from you all. And I firmly believe that the audience that sees this is going to feel the same way. There's been some really, really tremendous, hopefully practical, actionable information that's come out of this, and some great insights. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
For participating, and we'll look forward to seeing how the conversation goes forward from here.
Okay,
Thank you all.
great.
Thanks,
Thank you very much, Cary.